I, and I think several others as well, am struggling to properly describe my early feelings and impressions of Crimson Desert, as it feels like the kind of game that needs 10 to 15 hours for someone to be able to give a solid initial impressions, and most of us only got 4 to 6. So instead of just telling you that I think this game is going to be good or bad, I'm going to instead just walk you through my experience and give you some of my developing opinions and thoughts along the way, with the only story spoilers being from the prologue. Crimson Desert throws you immediately into the game with a super short cutscene of Cliff looking at his hand. It was a bit unexpected, as I thought we'd get a proper intro cinematic to, set up the world and story, but instead you're just dropped right into the linear and controlled prologue. But don't let that fool you, as the open world of 𝑝𝑢𝑟𝑡 is a big one with 5 distinct regions, all seamless and supposedly more than twice the size of Skyrim. And from what I played, that honestly almost feels like an understatement. I mostly used a PS5 controller. I wanted to give mouse and keyboard a solid try, but even after 5 to 6 hours of using the controller, I still didn't fully understand the controls. So relearning everything on mouse and keyboard didn't really feel worth it with the limited time that I had, but very basic movement-wise, mouse and keyboard seemed fine to me. One thing I noticed right away was the camera options, as you have 5 different view distances to cycle between, from fairly far out to a kind of pseudo first-person view. You don't actually see your character's body, but it's kind of nice in first person for conversations and examining things. Do note, though, that in combat, you're limited to, I believe, only using the 2 farther camera distances, so no super close or first person in combat, which is probably a good thing. The prologue itself, like I mentioned earlier, is linear and controlled, pretty much the opposite of what the full game seems to be. You spawn into the world at a 𝑔𝑎𝑚𝑒 camp, which is your character Cliff's mercenary group, the good guys basically, and you've just recently been attacked by a faction known as the Black Bears, the bad guys, and you're dealing with the aftermath of that battle. Now, the music, the gameplay style, cinematic presentation, and the voice acting are all good in the prologue, despite me feeling like there just wasn't enough of these story moments to establish some of the characters in meaningful ways. But what we did get, at least in the prologue, quality-wise, I'd say was pretty decent to good.
Giles' sword.
His last words were of you, Cliff. Come, say your farewells.
Unfortunately, though, after the prologue, these types of scenes only became even more scarce, making me really get that feeling that story is secondary in this game, which will be okay to some and not as okay to others. Even the supposed main antagonist of at least the early parts of the game, what I'm led to believe, just wasn't really set up with much depth. He's kind of just the guy who kills people, I guess. With all that said, I barely scratched the surface of this game, so there could be a ton that was just beyond my reach. After talking to a few Greymanes, and no dialogue choices from my experience if you are curious, your camp is ambushed by the Black Bears, and your leader dies and the basic combat tutorial begins. And speaking of combat in general, there's a decent amount to it, and by the end of my session I still hadn't developed the muscle memory for everything that I had learned, and it felt like there was still a ton to discover. This game has no difficulty options, so when you encounter a foe that feels too difficult, it's usually an indicator that you need to get better gear, more skills, or need to, prepare more. One of my criticisms of early game was that the combat was just too easy. I didn't even know what I was doing half the time, and hacking through most enemies while not really knowing what I'm doing wasn't a problem at all, and large groups were not very intimidating. Now, with that said, I know for a fact that there are some really difficult bosses in this game. I just didn't get to experience enough to speak on difficulty as a whole. At a basic level, the combat can be quite simple. You have light attacks, which don't cost any stamina, heavy attacks, which do. I wouldn't really classify the combat as requiring major stamina management, but it does require some for some skills. When you sprint and then attack, the attack animation changes, allowing for a wider, AoE-like swipe. There's jump attacks. You can hold down the block button with your shield, but blocking incoming attacks does use up some stamina, so keep that in mind. There's a parrying type mechanic, which requires timing, and you can hold circle or B to roll or sidestep. If you just keep it at that, it's not really insanely complex or anything like that, but there's actually a lot more to it that's offered, such as plenty of multi-button input attacks, like combining R1 and R2, or triangle and circle. And some of these attacks are spirit attacks, and this is where the game can start to feel more like a fighting game. The feeling of combat early on in the game, I'd say, was pretty good, but what I really enjoyed about the combat system, though, was the breadth of options. And I thought it was cool that some of the non-combat mobility or puzzle-solving skills that I learned can also be quite useful in combat as well. Now, this little leaf above the health bar represents your spirit, and some skills that you learn, such as this force push skill, hitting RB and right trigger at the same time, which is this extra heavy spirit attack, and this huge aerial ability all consume spirit. Spirit does regen slowly on its own, but you can't just endlessly use your spirit attacks. And we'll talk about character progression and learning more of these types of skills here in a little bit. Back to the prologue combat tutorial, you end up getting killed by the leader of the Black Bears, which triggers a small cutscene. Cliff is tossed into a body of water, but ends up surviving, of course, and waking up in a strange realm called the Abyss, which is a place somewhere between dream and reality. This is still the prologue, so I'm not spoiling anything outside of that. You'll be returning to this Abyss realm quite often. It even has its own map that layers over the regular ground map, and basically the sky map, I believe. But for the prologue, you're put in the Abyss to set up some of the story elements. Some outside force basically wants you to live and survive and restore the lands or something like that. But this part of the prologue also serves to teach some movement-based and puzzle-solving tutorials and skills, if you will. And this is where I think a lot of players are actually going to get frustrated. The controls are interesting to say the least. If you don't like feeling mobility challenged, especially outside of combat, this alone might cause a few of you to smash your monitor if you're not patient with yourself. Personally, I enjoyed some of the learning curve here because it feels different from other games. There's a bit of a sense of achievement that you can feel that arises when you finally get things down, even basic things. But I'm going to take a guess and say that some of the Steam reviews will have some very angry comments stating that the controls suck. The help menu literally has, I think, 50 entries just for basic controls, as you can see right here. And at this time, only mouse and keyboard buttons can be remapped. Let's take something as simple as sprinting. It feels a little unusual and different. So in Crimson Desert, you have to repeatedly press X to start sprinting and then, continue sprinting faster. If you press it a couple times, you can let go and it will maintain that speed. But if you want to keep sprinting and getting faster, you have to keep repeatedly pressing it. And this does drain stamina, while a normal light jog, you don't have to repeatedly press anything, nor does it use any stamina. So sprinting in this game feels a little bit more situational than most other games. Jumping is simple on its own, but when combined with sprinting to clear large gaps, it gets a little awkward since you're rapidly tapping X and then switch over to circle or square or whatever it is. For most players, I think it's going to take a little bit of time to get used to even many of these basic movement techniques. But like I said, when you do finally get it down, it can feel really good, and it can make a navigation of terrain more engaging in this game than it is in other games that are out there where you can just kind of turn off your brain. There's also a targeted jump system where you hold L1, you aim your cursor, and then you jump to that target, and it works. But it's not something that many of us are used to, and sometimes I do wonder if it's ever really needed to be like this in the first place. I think overall, though, it's going to be an interesting debate on the interwebs how these controls work. Climbing is pretty straightforward, but it does use stamina, so you can fall if you don't plan your Root right or find a place to temporarily rest to regain your stamina. Puzzles in this game appear to be a fairly important aspect of this game, and mastering your movement and controls is actually part of that. It's part of navigating these puzzles, so I highly recommend players to take their time in this game. Give yourself time to learn, and if you're not willing to do that, you're going to get really frustrated. And speaking of puzzles, in the prologue, you are introduced to this light reflection mechanic, as you can see on my screen, where you use your sword to aim light, reflect light at heat reactive objects, which will then open doors and stuff like that. And actually later on in the game, I ran up to a tower that was covered in vines. The door was covered, and the game wanted me to set an arrow on fire from a brazier to burn the vines. A nearby event technician informed me that I could also use the light reflection to burn the vines if I stood in the sun in an area where I could reflect the light. I thought that was pretty cool, as it shows that there are at least sometimes multiple ways to solve things in this game. I'd encountered, I'd say, 3 or 4 notable puzzles in my time playing, and a really massive one, but that was in a separate session where the devs let a few of us play on a load point that was much later on in the game. And all these puzzles involved moving gears around discs, cubes, and plates, trying to line things up, connecting things, moving lasers around. And all of this is mostly done to allow energy to flow into certain places to, open up special doors and stuff like that. As you can see right here, this ability is called Axiom Force, and it allows me to manipulate objects. But interestingly enough, like I said with some of the combat type skills, this ability can also be used as a grappling hook of sorts later on in the game if you actually get that skill. You can use it for movement, you can use it for combat in a way. It's kind of cool how you can do that with a lot of skills. Now, many of these puzzles did require careful navigation of the puzzle arena. Part of the challenge, maybe it's just because I didn't have the muscle memory yet, was moving around the puzzle areas and not falling off of cliffs and stuff like that. So your mobility techniques do come into play. In some ways, it reminded me of some of the Zelda game puzzles, at least more so than a game that's more of a mystery math puzzle type game. And I'd say it was one of the highlights of my initial impressions experience, and I'm looking forward to finding more of these puzzles and hopefully a wider variety. You also get a lantern tutorial in the prologue, and it's more important than it sounds. Lanterns aren't just for seeing in the dark. They actually highlight puzzle elements and can reveal pathways forward and give you answers. But again, it ties back to the controls. Even something simple like using the lantern requires different inputs than most games. You have to go through a few steps to understand kind of how to use it the right way, so it takes some time to get used to. Eventually in the prologue, you'll reach a platform that pulls you back to the moment that you were dying before a mysterious force or character saves you, and just like that, you're now fully in the world of 𝑝𝑢𝑟𝑐ℎ. After you follow this one character for a little bit, he gets you on your horse and he teaches you a little bit about that. The game then opens up and lets you explore freely. Now, with that said, I'd strongly recommend sticking to the main quests early on, since it continues in somewhat tutorial type of way. It's not like an official tutorial, but it does teach you different things that are in the game. I ended up wandering off before doing these main quests, and honestly, it wasn't that enjoyable because I had no idea what I was doing mechanics wise, nor did I know or understand what the game even wanted me to do at that time. When you do push on with the main quest, it's somewhat interesting, I'd say, but it just doesn't feel like that deep of a story. You're being guided and aided by mysterious beings that want you to set 𝑝𝑢𝑟𝑐ℎ straight, but the way it's presented, at least early on, makes the quests feel a little disconnected from one another. It almost has an MMO style structure and feeling to it. Some of these main quests feel like, side quests in other games. But with that said, I think these early quests are more so meant to get you acquainted with what the game offers mechanics and systems wise. It has you running on rooftops, doing some mini games, using tools in the game, stuff like that. So perhaps later on in the game, after you reunite with some of your Greymane faction, it'll be much more story-centric focused.
Good day.
Aside from the main quests, you also have faction quests. And I feel like from my time in the game, the faction quests are basically the side quests. I don't think I found any official side quests. I just had my main quests. There could be. I just didn't find them myself. And faction quests become available to you by doing things such as talking to certain NPCs. You can pick up bounties and hunt certain characters for different factions. And then there's also challenges, some of which are acquired by finding certain items, and these can range from typical challenges that you'll find in games, such as killing X amount of enemies with X weapon, but there's also more involved, interesting ones, such as completing a puzzle challenge, and many of these challenges reward the player with skill acquisition and upgrade materials, such as Abyss artifacts, which let's talk about that a little bit right now. So there's no leveling or XP in Crimson Desert. It's all gear-based and skill acquisition-based. As you can see right here, there's 3 skill trees, all connecting back to the center. And one way to unlock new skills is by spending Abyss artifacts that you've found or earned from challenges, etc. The top blue tree here are mostly stamina type skills, such as new grappling techniques. You can actually get unarmed combat, there's special slash attacks, and so on. The green tree is your spirit skills, such as super high jumps, force attacks, slowing down time, some of these nature green type skills. And the red tree has some more tool-based skills. You can use these tools for puzzles, and elemental type skills, such as a lightning attack, imbuing your weapons with different elemental effects, etc. Now, each of these nodes that you see here in the skill that each node offers go deeper than just one upgrade, though. As you can see right here, if I click on the grappling skill, I can then learn several different types of grappling attacks, most of which require a multi-button input to activate, so it's a little bit more advanced than some other games. This part of the game is a plus for me as of right now, and it's one of my biggest motivators to come back to this game, to grind out some of those artifacts, to find more artifacts, to do more puzzles, to do more challenges, and get these artifacts to upgrade my character further, and try out as many of these combat and utility skills as I possibly can, because many of them look like they'll be a ton of fun trying out, and the little ones that I did get to experience, they're quite enjoyable and they felt unique. Like I mentioned earlier, I did get to experience a later load point with a more upgraded character, and that character felt very different from my character that I played from the beginning. And honestly, it was exciting to think about progressing my own character to that point that I experienced later on in the game. So I feel like as of right now, that feeling of progression of your character becoming more powerful and being just a cooler, more fun character, I think that will be rewarding in this game. Unfortunately, I didn't get to try out too many weapons, but it seemed like you could have 3 active ones to cycle between. Do note that dual wielding is a thing in this game, and I did get to try it for a few minutes on the later load points. Unfortunately, I don't have footage of that for you. We couldn't show that, and it felt really cool. I also tried the spear, which I thought was really good. There was like this spirit spear that would do something with souls. It was pretty fun. I used the bow, and the bow is actually a little underwhelming feeling, and do note that arrows are a limited resource, but there's also axes, great swords, rapiers, there's guns, although the guns might be limited to that female character that you can unlock later on in the game. I'm not entirely sure. And on that note, there's 2 other characters that you'll eventually unlock and be able to use them for open world activities, and they have different skills and styles. But since I didn't get to that point, I don't want to talk about it too much in this video. Needless to say, between skill upgrades and weapons, initial impressions wise, for a game that doesn't tout itself as an RPG, with levels and attributes and all that stuff, the character progression systems that they do have are appealing to me, and I'm super thankful that I got to try that later load point, as it reassured me that that character progression seems like it's going to be meaningful. Now, since I didn't find any new armor, I might have found a piece or 2, but I don't really know much about armor except that there's a bunch of different slots, more than I would have thought for an action adventure game. So we have a head slot here. There's a slot that combines chest and main leg armor together, so it's just one piece. A jacket slot, a boot slot, and a glove slot. And then there's a ton of trinket slots with rings. You can have an amulet. You can actually have a mask. There's a slot for a mask if you want to do robberies, and more. But let's now talk a little bit about the world. So obviously it's massive and beautiful, and there's some challenges and some interesting, points of location that I really want to go explore. And I'm definitely excited to check out some of the other areas and biomes. With that said, don't expect Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 or Baldur's Gate 3 levels of NPC activity or reactivity in this game. Most NPCs seem to be more like visual props to add, visual immersion rather than ones that you can have meaningful engagements with. I kind of expected that. I didn't expect it to be crazy because it's not like a true RPG, but it was a little underwhelming, and I'd be lying if I didn't tell you that. I don't think you can even kill regular NPCs in this game, at least from what I tried. When you shoot them, or when I did it with the bow, it just would go through their body, and it would piss off the guards, which you'd end up fighting, but I don't think I could kill them. And even some of the wildlife didn't seem like I could kill, but there is some sort of hunting system in the game, so maybe I was just doing it wrong. Not entirely sure, but you can piss off guards and then kill the guards. Now, there's some sort of crime system that goes with this. You can go to jail. If you steal things, the cops are going to come after you. I don't think they're called cops back then, but you get what I'm saying. But I didn't really get that deep into it. But from initial impressions wise, it didn't seem like it was too crazy deep, but I guess it's something just to add a little intensity to being careful with what you do. And with that said, there are certain builds that I heard about that you can do where if you get powered up and you're also wanted and you have the law coming after you, your character becomes more powerful when you're wanted, which I think is actually pretty interesting to think about. An interesting little combination there. Like I mentioned earlier, you do get a horse right after the prologue. It feels a little funky, not gonna lie. Kind of reminds me of The Witcher 3 a little bit. You kind of get like stuck on things, it seems like a decent amount. But once you get used to the controls, it's not too bad, and it works pretty decently when you're not running into rocks and stuff. And when you're on a high ledge, or perhaps if you fall from the abyss when you're doing a puzzle, there is this aerial glide ability that you'll get very early on in the game. But since you don't have a ton of stamina, it doesn't really allow you to glide that well. But it does save you from falling to your death. And later on in the game, this becomes much more powerful. Fellow content creator Luality actually got to ride a dragon on a later load point, and I watched a little bit of her doing that, and it looked pretty cool. And we already know that there's also a mech that you can pilot in certain areas, but I didn't get to experience either of those myself, so no sense in really talking about it in this video too much. I didn't get to explore the open world as much as I was hoping, as I was busy learning the basics with the main quest, but I will say that it did wander off pretty far from the starting area at one point, and I came across this camp fortress-like area. You can see the gameplay here. And really, none of the NPCs were really doing anything or offered anything at all. They're all just kind of standing there. I couldn't trade with any of them. I think I could only do very basic greetings, no actual conversations. There was no faction quests that I got. Really nothing. And I got bored and I just started shooting at people, which didn't kill them, but it did piss off some of the guards. And then I started fighting for my own entertainment. I'm not sure why this camp was so lifeless. It could have been a bug possibly. I was playing on a very early version of the game. Not very early, but early compared to the review copy version. Or it could be some sort of camp or area that requires you to liberate it first. I don't know. I heard something about a liberation mechanic where you liberate an area and then it unlocks a bunch of content. So I'm not entirely sure. I didn't have enough time or knowledge to fully understand that. Regardless, it was a little concerning, and it made me wonder if there's going to be a ton of underwhelming, rather lifeless areas on this huge map with not much going on besides NPCs standing around. Then we also have systems such as mining. You cut down trees to gather resources for the trees to then upgrade certain weapons. Gathering herbs, you can kill animal. I had a hard time killing animals, actually. I know there is a hunting system, like I said, but you can get meat from animals and then, do the whole cooking system. And cooking actually is a good way to have heals available for you. There's fishing in the game, which unfortunately I didn't do. I wish I did. I like fishing typically in games. And then there's a million other systems that we just simply didn't have enough time to experience. The one system that I wish I got to experience, though, was the Greymane camp building system. So without spoiling really the story here, your Greymanes are disbanded in the prologue, but then one of your missions at the start of the game is to reform them and build up your camp. And there's like some camp building mechanics that go with that, and you see all your companions there and stuff like that. I didn't make it to the Greymane camp, which I think is in chapter 3. Unfortunately, I didn't get to experience that. I'm hoping that's where like the story and the characters come more to life, and that there's some interesting mechanics. Performance wise, just go watch the Digital Foundry video. They did a deep dive on PC performance and everything came back good. I believe pretty much all of it. So I think thumbs up in that category. For us at the event, it was also a thumbs up, playing the game on Ultra with ray tracing. I don't know of anyone that had any performance problems. As far as console players go, no idea. But 𝑠𝑢𝑝𝑝S has said that they're going to release things before the game comes out. That's the plan. And I think they may even have said that they're going to try to give it to another YouTube channel that can do a deep dive on the console metrics. So if you're a console player, you should be, a little bit worried or concerned because you never know with console, especially an Xbox Series S, you're going to have to wait a little bit longer. As far as bugs go, I did experience a couple that caused me to reload, but I was, playing on an earlier version than even the review code version. And a couple other players told me they didn't experience those bugs. So I think it's going to be okay, but I don't know after 5 hours for such a massive game. I'm sure there's going to be bugs, but hopefully they're not too bad. It wasn't a major area of concern for me in my time playing. Let's go ahead and try to summarize everything here. I would say initial impressions wise, Crimson Desert was exciting, confusing, and concerning to me. But overall, after 5 to 6 hours, I am still interested in experiencing more, and I will be playing more. I actually got a review copy of the game. Bravo to 𝑝𝑢𝑟𝑐ℎ for sending those out before listening to people's hands-on impressions. I think that's awesome that they did that. But that is some sort of thumbs up from me, the fact that I'm interested in playing again. I'm excited to jump back in, but man, this game just has so much to explore and learn, and it's so hard to give like a solid initial impressions, and I think you guys should take all of these with a grain of salt, as many of our opinions might drastically change from our initial impressions to an actual review. The combat skills and progression systems associated with that, the excitement of coming across some of the challenging bosses that I got to see a few others encounter, the puzzles, the way that many of your character's skills and movement techniques can be useful in a variety of different situations, from puzzles to land navigation to combat, and that vast, beautiful open world, the setting, at least visually speaking, are all things that were really appealing to me as of right now. I would say in some ways I enjoyed the challenge of the controls and the mobility techniques. It forces you to be a little bit more engaged with the moment-to-moment gameplay. You're thinking, you're really trying to learn how to control your character, but I do think that's going to be a great topic of debate. I appreciate that there's a lot to learn and master, but at the same time, I do wonder how many players will just see these controls as clunky or overly complex and too frustrating. Things I'm unsure of the game's difficulty balance as of right now. I'm unsure of how interesting the vast amount of systems that I encountered will be in the long term. Taking mini games, for example, like some were fun, I guess, doing it once or twice, but I nothing really, from what I played, nothing seemed like it was going to be like Gwent in The Witcher or anything of that caliber. And I'm unsure of how, systems like, mining and upgrading your weapons, I'm unsure of how interesting that stuff is going to be in the long run. I just don't really know. And I'm also unsure of the story as a whole. I am interested in seeing where things go to a certain degree. Like, it's not like I'm not curious at all, but the game hasn't done anything yet in my time with it to make me that invested into the story. Certainly not really emotionally invested in any notable way, such as character building and stuff like that. But that may change as time goes on. I didn't even make it to the Greymane camp and trying to establish that, and that's when you reunite with some companions. So maybe it will get much better in that category, or maybe it won't. Maybe it's just not a story focused game at this point in time. Since so many of you guys are love stories in video games on my channel, I would say that right now I'm more so looking at the story as something that is going to unlock cool stuff for my character and unlock cool areas, versus being something, a deep story where I'm like, I can't wait to get revenge on this character. And that's going to be a problem for some of you, but like I said, initial impressions wise, this could change. And things that I'm actually concerned about right now, the amount of lifeless NPCs that I encountered. And lifeless doesn't mean that they're static necessarily, just there's not really much interaction you can do with most of them besides a basic greeting, and then they kind of just repeat the thing that you just heard 30 seconds ago from greeting another NPC. So I am concerned about that. You know, I'm a little bit worried that the overall world interactions are going to be underwhelming when it comes to NPCs. Not the end of the world for like an action game, but you know, I'd be lying if I wasn't expecting it to be a little bit more interesting than that. And maybe things start going crazy when you start liberating areas and NPCs change and stuff, but I'm feeling like a lot of this stuff was more visual proppy than actual meaningful content. And I'm going to leave it at that for this video. Take it as you will. I'm going to be playing the game more with my review code, so I'll have more videos when that embargo lifts. And thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it. And I'll catch you all on the next one.